Dr. Jennifer Gold, and I'm going to talk first and sort of introduce you, for those of you that don't know about vesicular stomatitis, sort of to the disease. I apologize for the sunlight. You're not going to be able to see my slides very well, but we'll put it on the website or the Facebook so you guys can actually get it. It's also being videotaped, so you guys can get it that way. And then once I'm done, then the state veterinarian will take over and talk more about quarantining and stuff like that, and then questions and answers after that. You guys can feel free to interrupt me as I go. Basically, what I was going to do is sort of introduce you to the disease and why there's concern over it more than anything else. Let me know if you can't hear me, but I usually can project fairly well. Well, there. So basically, what is this disease? Well, it's a virus, and I'll talk about viruses versus bacteria in just a second. The interesting thing about this is that it's a virus of the Rhabdoviridae family, which is actually the same family that rabies comes from, but it doesn't have any relation to rabies. There are two types of viruses in the Rhabdoviridae. There's the lyssavirus, which is rabies, and then there's the vesicular virus, which is what causes vesicular stomatitis. So if we're going to try to think about bacterial disease versus viral disease, right? So bacteria are one-celled individuals that cause infection just like viruses do, but they are easily treatable with antibiotics or antimicrobials. The problem with viruses is that they're not quite as easily treatable. There are antivirals, but especially for horses, as some of you guys know from equine herpes virus, they're abnormally expensive in horses, and so you don't typically treat horses with antivirals. So especially with this one, it sort of gets to run its course, just like if you have the common cold, it runs its course and you're okay next. The same thing with this is that it's like the common cold, the horses get it, they get through it, and it goes away, and you actually don't treat them with anything. So what does this virus look like? It's like a bullet shape, and you guys can barely see over there in the corner. That's sort of the picture of it up on the screen, and then there's other pictures of it there. And the big thing about this, there's multiple different strains of this virus, but the big ones that they talk about are the serotype New Jersey and the serotype Indiana. And these are the ones that any time that if your horse is diagnosed with the disease, they try to type it, whether it's New Jersey or Indiana. And those are the ones that have seemed to have caused disease since the Civil War, basically. So the epidemiology of the disease is that it was first reported in 1916, although there's reports in some of the literature that they think it was around during the Civil War, so it's been around for quite a long time. In 1926 is when they first distinguished the two different serovars, so Indiana and New Jersey. And then in the 1990s is when the first fairly large outbreaks occurred in the Southwest. So we're pretty endemic at this point. In 1995 was the first big outbreak, and there was 1,162 investigations of the disease. They looked at it in 42 different states, but interestingly, and I have Arizona in red, but basically vesicular stomatitis was confirmed in Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming. And it's a very big, it happens all the time. New Mexico, Texas, Arizona, and you'll see that repeated over and over again in the outbreaks. So in this outbreak in 95, 78% of the premises had horses, and they were seen in horses, and 22% of the premises had cattle, and there was actually a llama that got it. So llamas and alpacas can get it as well. In 1997, the first index case. So when you talk about any sort of disease outbreak, there is an index case. So there's the initial case that causes it, and then it can spread. And so the first one in 1997 was in Maricopa County, in Arizona, and they had 689 investigations that were suspect in this one. There was VS cases in 40 states, or they looked for them in 40 states, and the 4 states were involved again: Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah. Okay, 1998, the first index case was in New Mexico. They had basically 130 investigations were positive for VS. 4 states again were affected: Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, Colorado. This is going to be repeating. 99% of those cases were equine, 1% of them were cattle, and that was Indiana that was indicated. This is sort of gets more interesting in this. Some of you guys weren't here when some of us were talking, and I was talking about how it seems like more and more we're seeing more and more of these cases. And is it because of climate change? Insects are coming earlier, they're going around more. So is it because of that, or is it because we're noticing it more in the horse population in certain areas? I don't know. In 2004, there was 470 positives: Texas, New Mexico, Colorado. In 2005, there was 9 states involved and 786 positives. 2006, Wyoming was the only lucky one, and it had 29. 2009, Texas, New Mexico. 2010, Arizona had 4. 2012, Colorado, New Mexico had 290. 2014, Texas, Colorado, Nebraska, 433. And Texas and Colorado just actually had their quarantine lifted fairly shortly ago. Just so you guys have an idea of economic cost, and this was economic cost to dairy herds only. So the thing that you guys need to remember is that if it happens on your farm and you have horses that are coming and going, it can be an economic impact to you guys as well, because horses can't come and go, right? So you're quarantined. But just so you have an idea, 1928 California dairy herds, they had, it was either they lost $97 to $202 lost per head, okay? And then in 1995 in a New Mexico beef herd, they lost $53 per head. So losses were due to culling them, increased mortality, reduced milk production if you're in a dairy herd, decreased weight gain if you're in a beef herd, and then labor, medicine, and veterinary costs. So the reason why this is more of a deal is because of economic cost, not high mortality rate. With that being said, the morbidity, so when I talk about morbidity, morbidity means animals affected, okay? So with the morbidity, it ranges anywhere from 5% to 90%, but sometimes it can be a lot more. About 100% of animals that are in an area where it's on a property, 100% of them seroconvert, meaning they test positive for it even if they don't have the disease, okay? Mortality tends to be higher in adults, but this disease rarely kills anything. It probably kills pigs more than anything, but it really doesn't kill things. Death is very, very rare in cattle and horses. It's probably less. The vesicular stomatitis virus itself is the disease of the Western Hemisphere. I think there's some rare cases in the Middle East, but basically there's only one other area where the disease is endemic, which isn't in the United States. So other areas are South America, Central America, and Mexico, which sort of makes sense. How is it transmitted? I can tell you guys, the more I've researched it, the more I realize that they don't know. So transmission is considered, so this virus is considered an arbovirus. What is an arbovirus? Well, it's any sort of virus that's transmitted by mosquitoes, ticks, flies, gnats, anything that's transmitted by some sort of insect type being is what's considered an arbovirus. So other examples of that: West Nile, the encephalitis, dengue fever in people, yellow fever in people. Those are all arboviruses. Make sense? So in the Southwest, they typically, the vectors are typically arthropods, and the outbreaks typically occur right now in the late spring, early summer, and continue through the late fall. And typically index cases are outbreaks in Arizona or New Mexico. Transmission, they think, is due to the association of how many insects and the abundance of the insects. And then new cases occur as the weather gets warmer and as more and more insects hatch. So the different vectors that they think transmit this, in particular, one, and again you can't see them very well, is the sandfly. The other one is the horsefly. The other one is the deer fly. Then we have our favorite mosquitoes, the culicoides and the Aedes mosquito, biting midges, houseflies, eye gnats, black flies, stable flies, none of which that we ever see around here. And most likely some of the biggest vectors are the gnats, the sandfly, and the black flies. So those are all things that we never see. The other problem with outbreaks, and outbreaks have occurred due to transportation of infected animals, right? So they may have become infected, they don't show clinical signs, they get the coggins, they get the health certificate, they get on the trailer, they go somewhere else, and then they share the wealth, right? So the example in 1983, there was cases of cattle that were in Idaho. They got the disease, they traveled to California. California got blessed with having a huge outbreak in 1983. 1995 outbreak, the horse in New Mexico went to Texas and then started the outbreak in Texas. So, luckily that can be part of it too, so you want to be vigilant, and we'll talk about clinical signs in a second. When they talk about direct contact, I think, again, as I was saying, the more I researched it, the more I found out that they didn't know. When they did experiments in pigs, they inoculated pigs with the New Jersey strain of the virus, and the pigs that didn't test positive for it they had pigs that were negative for it, and then they had the pigs that they infected. And the pigs that were infected with it that had visible lesions transmitted it to the negative pigs. So they know that it's obviously nose-to-nose contact as well as insects. Okay? They don't really know who the reservoir, so the insects are just hatching, right? So how do the insects get it? They think that the deer mouse, which is very popular in the Southwest, again. I remember being in the Grand Canyon when the hantavirus was out, we're all like, because they carry hantavirus as well. But they think that the deer mouse might house it in its body, doesn't make it sick, but when the insects bite the deer mouse, we can transmit it to other ones. Risk factors for this disease, I think you guys are all probably aware of this by now, is that animals with access to shelter where there's not a whole lot of flies, which is very hard to do anywhere, have a reduced risk. You can decrease insect populations. There's a decreased risk. But the big risk comes in if you live anywhere by standing water or running water. There's a bigger risk because there's a lot more insects. Anytime you have water around and insects hatch, they go. So if you can get rid of any standing water, especially during the monsoon, it's better to get rid of the standing water and have it near you. So the only thing we know, sadly, about this and the pathogenesis, we know what happens with viruses and how they affect cells. And this is the other reason that's different from bacteria, is that a virus can't live unless it goes into a cell of some sort of animal and infect the cell, and then it replicates in the cell, and then it multiplies. Bacteria can live on their own, and they do their infection that way, but viruses cannot. So the only thing we know about how this virus works is it attacks the cell, it injects its ribosomes into the cell replicates, and so it takes over basically the machinery of the cell, and then it can continue replicating. However, from there, they don't really know much more than that, sadly. So I tried to contact a bunch of people today, people that were a lot smarter than me, thinking that I could get some answers, and I couldn't get any answers, sadly. So the pathogenesis of the disease, they don't know a lot. They do know that horses, so unlike some diseases, horses don't get viremic with this disease, so meaning that if another insect bites them, they transmit it to another horse. It's not in the blood. It's not in, we don't believe it's in the semen. And so really it's only the vesicles in the skin that burst open, and that's how it gets spread. But it isn't a viremia. The horses do not get viremic from this. So they don't get heinously ill like with some other diseases. Clinical signs, typically there's a 3 to 7 day incubation period. Initially the animals have a fever, and it can be all over the board. So horses, normal temperature, 99 to 101. Some people say 99 to 105. These horses will have fevers anywhere from low grade to a little bit higher. They're not like some other viral diseases that cause very, very high fevers like 105, 106, but they can be up there. But it's sort of all over the board. And then a lot of times the clinical signs after that become drooling is one of the first clinical signs that you see. So they have excess salivation, becomes one of the first clinical signs. And then they get these raised vesicles, and then they get erosions, and it occurs on the muzzle, the tongue, the cheek, the coronary bands. There are, especially in cattle, but it has been reported that it can show up on the prepuce and mammary glands of horses, but definitely more so in cattle and goats and sheep. And you guys are probably going to get to see this a little bit more, but not much. So the picture on the right, you can see the foam, the little white there, that's foam. The lesions, some of them actually look a little bit similar to summer sores, but they are a lot different. They can get lesions around the coronary band, so thickening. Then on the right-hand side, the horse has basically none of its normal tongue left, so they basically get their tongue becomes very, very eroded, and it hurts a lot. So I think the big question is why is this such a big deal? And one of the biggest reasons why it's such a big deal is because you want to rule out other diseases. And really the other disease that you want to rule out is foot and mouth or hoof and mouth disease, which is a foreign disease. And we've never had it, knock on wood, yet, in the United States. And that is a very, very costly disease. And so you have to discern whether vesicular stomatitis isn't hoof and mouth. Now, the difference, and the big difference is horses do not get foot and mouth disease. So the fact that horses are getting this disease helps rule that out. But if you have an outbreak in cattle, especially, you don't know that. Or if you have cattle on the property. Okay? You can't really see this, but this was a way to sort of talk about clinical signs and how they are the same with foot and mouth, vesicular stomatitis, swine vesicular disease, and vesicular xanthoma in pigs again. And they all produce a fever, vesicles that are progressive, erosions in the mouth, muzzles, teats, and feet. So that's why it's such a big deal. But again, luckily, foot and mouth. How is this disease diagnosed? There's basically 3 ways to test for it. One of them is antibody detection, which is usually the way they do it. And the next one is you detect the virus by virus isolation. And then lastly, you detect it by looking at genetic material. viral neutralization is the gold standard, and if a horse has antibodies that are greater than 1 to 40, it's considered a positive.
That's our dog.
He's invited.
No.
He's like, no. The ELISA test for antibodies is the choice that's most frequently used in the United States, and then a lot of times if you have a positive to an ELISA, then they'll do viral neutralization or complement fixation to double check that yes, it is indeed positive. Other tests that can happen is that they can isolate the virus from the vesicles, so there's fluid in the vesicles before they burst, and so they can isolate that, or you can swab the lesions and you can look for virus particles that way. And I don't know if you guys ever heard of PCR, which is polymerase chain reaction. It's the way it's advanced testing greatly, and a lot of these tests they can get done in 24 hours. And with PCR, you can distinguish whether it's Indiana or whether it's New Jersey, and that's the way they distinguish which serotype that it is. So what happens once you think that you have vesicular stomatitis on your property is that the practitioner notifies the state veterinarian, who becomes very happy that this is happening to his property. And then the state veterinarian makes the decision on whether the area needs to be quarantined. And then every place is a little bit different, but if you, in reading what at least is in USDA, is that they say the quarantine premises are eligible for release from quarantine 14 to 21 days after the onset of the lesions and the last affected animal on the premises. But our state vet will clarify that when he talks. What do you do with therapy for this disease? It's basically very short-lived and self-limited. So again, what we were talking about originally, it's high morbidity, so a lot of horses get it, but it doesn't go very far, it doesn't last very long, and they get over it. There is no specific treatment for it, so typically horses recover within 7 to 14 days. Some recover quicker. If you can imagine, the erosions take a while. It takes about, you can think about epithelium growing in, it takes 7 to 14 days for epithelium to grow back. So that's why it can take that long. Sometimes rinsing of the lesions with a mild antiseptic can help, or if they're not, or you can do topical antibiotics like triple antibiotic to help prevent secondary infections. Sometimes if they're having a hard time eating, which you can imagine some of them do, you can make kind of a mash out of their grain or their pellets, and that will help them want to eat something. Or if they're dehydrated and not drinking, which never happens here in Arizona, you might have to put them on fluids. I think the big thing is biosecurity, and not a lot of us do this very well sometimes, but it's basically, if you are suspicious of it, is you want to wear gloves when working with affected horses. You want to wear eye protection, and I'll talk about that in just a second, which is also indicated when examining and handling horses, because the big thing, and I think a lot of people don't realize this is a zoonotic disease. So humans can get this as well. Supposedly, if humans get it, you get clinical signs of kind of like the flu.
Very bad flu, by the way.
There you go. And so you want to be very, very careful for you coming in contact with it. And then restriction of movement of affected horses and herd mates are essential for control of the spread of the virus, and then it's quarantine. The nice thing about this virus is that it's easily inactivated, so disinfection works really well on your property. So the big thing is you want to get rid of organic matter, feces, urine, and then all you need to do is you have contact time less than 10 minutes, which is pretty nice. For some viruses are a lot tougher than that. So you can use iodophores, chlorine bleach, so all those we have at home. They're easy to use, but it's a good way to disinfect. Always the question right now is there any prevention, or is there any preventive measures? There's no vaccine right now that's licensed in the United States. There's a couple vaccines that are used other places, but they're not. The efficacy is questionable, and so, and the problem I think, as you guys well realize, is trying to get companies to make a vaccine is very, very expensive, and getting them on board to make a vaccine is hard. So how do we prevent this? Basically, protection from insect exposure, which is really easy to do here. Horses that are housed indoors during the evening if you can, but again, it's pretty hard to get rid of the insects. Regular application of insect repellents, especially inside the horse's ears where black flies like to feed. Any sort of fly sheet, fly mask, decrease any standing water, feed through fly control. I know some farms use feed through fly control, and it actually seems to work fairly well. But again, it just depends. If you have new arrivals on your facility or to an event, you want to have a certificate of veterinary inspection related to potential exposure of VS, inspection of newly arrived horses, including oral exam to detect any ulcers or vesicles. So especially if you're a farm where you have horses coming and going all the time, temperatures, look in their mouth, look in their hooves, and then wear disposable gloves. Wash your hands. I mean, really, biosecurity out of all the things is washing your hands is the best way for anything. So wash your hands in between the horses that you handle. Wash your hands after you get rid of crap, anything else. Wear disposable gloves. And that's the short and sweet of it. These are other additional resources for you guys to look up. But again, sadly, when I looked up and called all these people today, I couldn't find a lot of information. And before I turn it over, you guys have any questions? And there's also questions up there. Yeah.
Can you get it by horse drinking out of the same trough or
If they have vesicles, then chances are yes. So you don't want to share buckets or share bits or any of stuff like that, which people do a lot.
Are you state veterinarian to talk about what are we in for summary alcohol?
He'll talk about it a little bit, but I think that it's going to be a good question. Because I don't think, it's a little bit worrisome that it started this early, but I don't, it depends on whether you can get it contained.
And is it possible?
Probably not with the insects.
I mean, it really seems to be about prevention.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, more than anything.
Now, did I understand you correctly that if an infected horse is bit by a fly, the fly cannot then transmit it? The fly has to have it initially?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the big thing that
How did the fly
take
get it?
away is how the fly get it. We don't really know. But any animal that gets bit, that animal, or any time you're transmitting any sort of virus, let's say you have West Nile. When West Nile was the big thing, the West Nile was in birds, and they were viremic. So the birds were viremic, even though and birds would die from it. Insects would bite them, and then they would bite the horse. The horse was the dead end host, though. So an insect, it wouldn't go and transmit it to something else, right? So the same thing with this. It's not the horse that it has the viremia. It's the vesicles that are, and the insect that has it.
And then also, this cannot live on your pipe corral. It can't live on inanimate objects.
Not for a very long period of time. If it
10 minutes.
10 minutes, or my bet is, and I couldn't find anything on this, but changes in temperature and stuff like that are usually pretty good at killing viruses. But if your horse has lesions and it's on the pipe fencing, you better be really careful.
But if you're going someplace that there are corrals and there hasn't been a horse in there for 2 or 3 days, this virus isn't going to live on that corral.
If I live in an affected area,
Yeah.
there's a lot of speculation that it serves party knowledge going on.
Yeah.
And we are not, our barn is not affected, but
Right.
whatever the neighborhood is.
Right.
Is it safe for me to ride out with my horse, or am I gonna be stuck now all summer in the
I'm
barn?
gonna let him answer some of that.
Thank you.
I got one. Once an animal gets it,
Yeah.
and survives, is there breeding immunity?
They can get it
Get it
again.
again?
So if you leave quarantine animals, as long as you don't have contact, nose to nose, and as long as you don't carry it,
Right.
you don't have to, in other words, you don't have to quarantine like it's not airborne.
I mean, it's vesicular, so it's the vesicles that contain it. So it's not like
I mean, they
with
can sneeze.
right. But other than that, it's not airborne like some other like herpes.
So you don't need to be like quarantined with that.
Well, that is right. If
Fly,
they well,
of course, an open lesion into the next door is to say that they still get one whole.
I mean that fly has it.
Yes.
You can well if you touch the vesicle and you go to another horse, the virus is shed in the fluid or it's in the lesion. So you go, you don't wash your hands, you touch another horse, you're gonna carry
But
it.
if you have a horse with lesion, you know how flies clustered everywhere.
Right, and then technically it can, yes. But it's not because that horse is fighting it, it's because it got the virus on the flies. You can do Bambi and other
Can you
things.
repeat the question?
Could you repeat the questions?
If you have you have to quarantine a horse in the farm, signs. The barn to quarantine, or they be tested? You know what I'm saying?
You guys, why don't we hold the
I'll give
questions
it
for
to the
now?
state
I'm gonna
vet.
let the state vet talk,
Okay.
and then we can open it up to questions after that.
Usually I just wear them all out.
Thanks, Sergeant Gold.
All right, folks. I'm the state guy. Aim for this. If you're shooting, aim for that.
Yeah.
It hits me in my brain if you miss too far down.
No danger with me in that.
Okay, this is, well, for one thing, a lot of people out here think I talk a little funny. I've never had a problem with that, but if I say something that you all don't understand, please throw up a flag, holler. My name is Perry Durham, in case that's important to you. At least know who to send the nasty letters to in this one. Dr. Gold gave a really nice history. I'll also throw out, I'm going to leave it, there are pages back there. One page is a fast facts out of Iowa State Center for Food Safety and Public Health. It's a great one-page reference on DS. There's also another one-pager that we put together back in January for the outbreak we had down in Santa Cruz County. How many of you heard of that? How many of you are native? Let me back up. How many are native? Okay, few. How many of you have been here for the last 6 months? Okay. How many of you only had horses for the last 3 months? Because we had an outbreak of VS down in Santa Cruz County. The call I got was New Year's Eve, which is very atypical. And actually it's a little early right now. and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. What I'm going to do is kind of give you just a little bit more history. Dr. Doe did a great job of that. There is, and I'm going to leave it here, if anybody's into the history of diseases, there was a great one written in 1952 about this disease by a guy up in Wisconsin. It's free online. You can find the name that you can search for right here. But basically, we've been battling this disease for, well, like she said, McClellan wrote it in some of his notes during the Civil War. For those of you who know about the wrong side. But anyway, the reason this is seriously an issue here is because what happened in 1914 to 1918? Please tell me somebody knows some history. Thank you. World War I. And what did America ship to Europe? Lots of doughboys and lots of cavalry horses. When those horses got off the boat in Antwerp, guess what most of them looked like? Slobbering, pustular, oozing horse flesh. The noses were dripping on, I don't know how many of those horses. You can find this written up in a few places if you really can't sleep at night, you got nothing better to do. That happened, we gave it to the Belgians, we gave it to the French. Bottom line is they have hated us ever since over this. That really is the reason you have the burden of the state upon you.
They gave us smallpox.
Well, we've been spreading smallpox around the globe for a long time. And yes, it does look like this thing came out of Middle America, was shipped into Europe, Africa a couple of hundred years ago. It's bounced around. It's here. Those of us in this business, and I grew up on a farm, cows, horses, pigs, chickens, lots of tobacco fields. You know, we deal with diseases all the time. We all know. We've dealt with this disease off and on for a long time. Those of us that are now in the regulatory end of it laughingly call this a cyclical endemic foreign animal disease. Because we've always made this kind of deal to the rest of the world. No, it doesn't really happen here at all. It's just occasionally we get this incursion. But the fact of the matter is, you can look through the literature, it's happened here, on and on and on. But we took that stance to facilitate international trade. Because when this shows up, like it's already happened, Canada has shut the door. Any of you are trying to get back to Canada? Yeah, find a place that'll keep you for 3 weeks and then you can go. Because they will not let you in.
It's in Helena for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the modus operandi. The big change in dealing with this disease, and I'm going to deal with that part, and I'll deal with some of the disease part too. So if I miss anything that anybody's got interested about or question about, please throw it out. But in this beginning of this year, what's called the World Organization for Animal Health, which still goes by the acronym OIE, which is French for Organisation International Epizootics. Don't ask me to say that again. Delisted this disease. Now what that really means is that all of us countries around the world get together and have treaties, and we decide we're going to treat each other halfway decently if you'll treat us halfway decently. VSV was on the list that everybody had to report it internationally so everybody could go, oh, you got a hickey, don't come in. Well, about 3 years ago, the process started to get that off the list because everybody realized that, you know, the horse gets it. Most of the time they don't care all that much. So why are we making that big a deal? We got other fish to fry. And they actually took it off the list. That happened January 1 this year. Now, how long does it take for any kind of legislative process to occur? Yeah, you know, generations worth. So it's going to take a while for all the other entities around that get to play in this game to come to a consensus on how to do it. That's part of some of the consternation that some of you are experiencing this year. Traditionally, this has always been considered a foreign animal disease. So, if your veterinarian goes out, because you called him because there's a horse with a blister on the end of it, that person's going to go out there and go, crap, call the state veterinarian. By law, within 4 hours of suspecting it, the state veterinarian's going to run around and say lots of nasty things because he's only got himself to talk to, and that's the only way he gets attention. But at the end of that process, there will be a legal document that comes out there and says, because of the powers granted by the state, you're under quarantine. And the way it used to be, you were under quarantine through 2 or 3 testing procedures, and then you had to wait till the lesion, till the sores healed up, and then you had to wait 3 weeks after that. So you had typically a quarantine period of 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Anybody had this disease in the past? Just to give you an idea of how frequent it is, the case that popped up yesterday in Camp Verde. My officer served her today. She goes, yeah, I know all this. He goes, what do you mean you know all this? See that horse over there? In the same pasture 10 years ago, broke with this disease. I probably was the one who served her because I served about 75 of them. We had a miss of it too. It's here. It's always here. It just pops up once in a while. Here we go, right now. Getting back to the changes in the legal structure, though. Because of what we know about the way this virus works coming out of the horse, that the horse really isn't generating a lot of it, it's just what's in the sore. That's only we're only blowing off virus there 2 to 3 days typically in a horse. There was a weird outbreak in California where they actually were shedding virus for about 7, but almost inevitably it's 2 to 3 days. Oh yeah, and I'm one of those people who, anybody know what Plum Island is? What's Plum Island, ma'am?
That is an island off of Long Island where they do all the incredibly super deadly, lethal
Isn't that great?
research.
Thank you. Somebody pay her. That's a great lead into this. Yeah, and I'm a retread with the department. I've done a lot of different things in my life. In 2001, September 10, I started to work as an assistant state veterinarian. Yeah.
I was flying here that day.
My next day changed everything we were going to do, and for roughly the next 5-6 years, I did bioterrorism, agri-terrorism investigations, a lot of things like that. I spent a fair amount of time at Plum Island. We get to see these things in the real life situation. We infect animals, we watch what happens. It's kind of cruel and vicious, but it's also necessary if we're going to know how to deal with issues. Sadly, Plum Island is being closed, and we're hoping to get a new facility built. That's a side discussion. My point with that is we've been working with this virus for a long, long time in very finite situations, and we know pretty well how it reacts in the horse. Like I said, 2 days, 3 at the most, it's not an issue anymore. That's why there's been a change in how we quarantine. Once somebody goes out and finds a blister, they call me. It's not involving sheep, cattle, goats, pigs. Thank you. And I don't have to worry about all these other things. Like Dr. Gold said, foot and mouth disease scares us all from Jesus. The last time it was here it was 1929. Some of you may remember it in the UK in 2001. 6 million animals later, and a whole lot of smoke clears. We don't want that sort of situation. So how many of you do puzzles? Anybody do puzzles? You ever tried to take 3 puzzles and mix them all together and put them together? Is that not insane? But you got to realize that's what we're looking at every day when we see these things, because we don't know which picture we're getting to see. We're getting to see this one or that one or the other one. So we have to err on the side of caution, at least for a while. And in this epidemic, what we had was 1 4-Andy steer and 2 horses. And they all 3 had sores in them. So what have I got? That shipment went to Plum Island. Plum can do detection for virus. We ran PCR on that. All 3 animals came back positive. They had virus. They eventually all came back with screaming high titers too. But titers are immune responses. And that's an indirect way of finding out how or what is going on. How many of you did well on tests in school? Some of us were pillars of our class, but C equals DVO. Don't forget that. Okay? My point with that is what we're testing on most of these tests are the animal's immune response. And if that animal didn't get very smart in dealing with that virus, we're not going to see a very good test result. That has a big aspect in reading these tests. That's also why we have a complement fixation test, a C ELISA, and a B ELISA, and it seems like there's something else. Oh, and the PCR. So we've really got 4 tests to figure out what's going on there, because none of them are like James Bond and CSI and that sort of thing. It doesn't have that. So we have to kind of back into these things a lot of times. That's also part of why some of you may hear, well, it was negative. Why won't he let me out of the quarantine? Because if it's got feathers, it waddles, and it quacks, what are y'all going to think it is? Just because somebody tells you a horse, are you going to believe it's a horse? Probably not. One of the things I always drive home to people, or try to, is that eyes, ears, nose, our ability to hear, particularly if we've been out doing this for a while, those are all diagnostic tests. They have equal validity to a sample that goes to a lab and comes back. Please keep that in mind when you're talking to your veterinarians about what's going on. They work very hard at doing good physical exams. It has a heck of a lot of value. Okay, I've gone all over the place in this. Now, what was I going to say? Oh, risk factors. Covered those really, really well. Perry's personal belief is that this virus somehow or another manages to survive in the bugs themselves, or their ova or pupa, or whatever they leave laying around on the Verde River. And when conditions are right, up they come, and they're coming up with the virus too. That's pure speculation, but God knows it certainly seems to fit a lot. Because it's up and down the Verde River. It's always up and down the Verde River. It's hardly ever anywhere else. Although, I gotta say, in 2005, I saw it out so far. How many of you know where the Joshua Forest is out here? Yeah. You ever see any water out there? I quarantined 6 horses out there that were screaming hot with me. They hadn't been off that property in years. I really fail to believe a bug's been flying that far either, and they, how or why. It's GOK, God only knows. Sorry, that's the best answer I can give. But seriously, keep the bugs down. Don't trade bits and water buckets and things like that, because if one slobbers in it, the next one's going to get it, you're going to come get it.
What about chicken?
Two things. Can everybody hear that?
No.
That's what I thought. We have a microphone up here, so if you got a question, either holler up here loud enough that somebody can relay it, or run up here and say it real quick, please, because this is important for everybody to know. Questions about riding off your property kind of thing. How many of you know about the theory of numerical ascension?
Okay.
Yeah, I know I'm full of it. Okay. How many of you know about the theory of numerical ascension? In other words, when your number is up,
Stop that.
you know, realistically, that there's a lot of truth to that, because we can say, okay, you get out there where there's a lot of horses. Last year in Colorado, I talked to guys who said, yeah, they actually saw it migrating through a barn. You got a barn of 40 horses, it probably hit 6 of them over the course of a month and a half. I never saw that in 2005. I've never seen it any time since. It can't happen. I do believe the virus has changed a little bit this go round, because I've also typically not seen sick horses. And I'm hearing a fair number of colicky ADR horses around. I heard a lot of that out of Colorado and Texas both last year. And 3 years ago, the Mexicans actually called Plum going, we need some help with this thing, because what we thought was sore mouth doesn't seem to be acting this way. We're getting a lot of sick, really hurting horses. Now, those of you who've seen it around this year, how many of you have seen pretty much half the tongue being peeled off? That's pretty much what I've seen around this year. Not a lot of sores out on the muzzle or nose. I've even seen it in years past up in the ears a lot. None of that. Not a whole lot on the gums either. It's just ripping off the tongue. And I do literally mean half the tongue's gone on almost all of these. Oh yeah, it'll come back just like, how many of you ever burned your tongue with coffee? Yeah, right. So how long does it take before you can taste again?
A couple days.
A couple of days. Your mouth, two things. Your mouth is an aggressive cellular structure. That's why it heals so fast. That's also on the flip side. If you get a tumor type in there, they're usually very aggressive and hard to deal with. For any of you, unfortunately, know people that have. Yes, sir.
What's the situation on interstate travel now?
Okay, let's get back to Perry's bread and butter then. The deal on the regulatory side, like I said, this came off of a kind of an international treaty situation by being delisted. However, that means that all the countries now are free to beat each other over the head all they want to, which is why Canada has actually gotten worse with it. The states, pretty much, it's all determined by what each and every other state wants to do. The map or the list of the states that we talked about: New Mexico,
California,
Colorado, Texas, Arizona, Utah.
Wyoming.
One other, Wyoming. The 6 of us met in Fort Collins in end of January, 1st of February this year with their federal colleagues to debate, discuss, and hash this out and how we're going to deal with it going forward. Basically, the plan we've been running here is what we came up with. Now, it's going to take a long, long time because of the legislative issues to get the rest of the states on board, but we're trying to get it to the point that unless you really are quarantined, you'll be free to travel. That doesn't exist today. Case in point, California's horse racing board yesterday closed California tracks to anything coming off First Paradise. I don't blame them a bit, and I don't think any of you would either. It hurts for those people who are trying to get there and make a living, but that's the way it is.
If we ship our horses, we sell a lot of horses to Brazil in that area. Our horses go to Montana, they go from here to Oklahoma, and Oklahoma on over. The question is, if we ship our horses out of Arizona, which is our only troubled state right now, when I send them to Montana, how long do I need to quarantine them before I can turn them loose?
Okay, a couple of 3 things about that. One, right now, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah all are carrying the VSV Hickey. Actually, New Mexico broke about a week ahead of us. Utah got it because somebody from the Rio Verde area took their animals up to a trail ride or an endurance ride in Kanab without any paperwork, without anything else. And when the vets up there examined them all pre-race, guess what they found? And they didn't, gets back to one of the points I want to make. They did not get a positive test on any of the antibody tests on that horse, but they actually grew virus out of it. So that one's in quarantine up there. So I got 3 states that are right now quarantined for.
Which are again?
Pardon?
Can you repeat those names again?
3 states that are currently under a VSV quarantine: Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. Now, I can't say there's any connection between the New Mexico-Arizona link. Don't know that at all. Although one of their cases was in Grant County. Which borders the state line over there in the White Mountains area. The other case I know of was in Otero, which is just north of El Paso. I think they had a 3rd case, but I haven't been able to catch up with Ellie because she's anyway. It's a spotty, like I said, it's a spotty thing, and I don't think the New Mexico situation had anything to do with ours. I think ours come up from him. I really do. But get back to answering the question. Those horses may be allowed to go to other states. It depends on the state. Some states require your veterinarian to contact the state veterinarian here to find out are they within 10 miles of a premise. Because some states' law says if you're within 10 miles of where a quarantine exists, you cannot come. Depends on the state. I think there are 17 or 18 like that, California being one of them. Some states draw the lines around the county, which now is going to change because Yavapai is going to be declared an infected zone by some of them, and you won't be able to come out of Yavapai to go there. Some places look at it on a state basis. So it's purely the state you're going into that can tell you what the right answer is. I know I've talked to Marty up in Montana, and I've got so many things in my head I can't tell you the specifics of it, but they did put a statement out restricting it.
14.
Okay, thank you.
So my understanding is that California has lifted the 10-mile regulations?
Thank you, yes.
But are now requiring a 72-hour TBI.
Exactly. And that actually gets back to what we were talking about up there in this winter, and what we've kind of hit you a couple of times with here, is that if the horse is only going to be having a virus on it for about 3 days, then we're kind of in the clear a few days down the road. And that's what we're trying to drive the regulations and the restrictions toward, to a more sane approach to this situation. But getting everybody on board is going to take time. Maybe, I hope not a generation, but probably a while. But yes, the state vet in California did let up on that 10-mile zone. And I think that's going to help a lot of people. I certainly hope so. The flip side, of course, is the racing folks that don't come here.
Horse shows are at racetracks quite often.
Pardon?
Horse shows are at racetracks quite often.
Yes, indeed. And that gets me to another point. If you're in the business of equine event management, you really need to stop and think about this. Because one thing I like to beat on a lot is English-speaking common law that says I can take you in front of the magistrate and argue my case and you'll wind up paying me damages. Goes back about 1,200 years here, Mr. Lawyer. Is that close? I mean, it was even made law 800 years ago in Runnymede with Magna Carta. So you don't have to wait for the state. I mean, the state might get into play, but realize the situation of one party suing another has been out there for a long, long time. And if you want to take it down that road, you are certainly welcome and able to do so. The state may or may not be imposing quarantines on your neighbor, and you think you ought to. But if nobody's been out there to say there's a sore over there, what probable cause does the state veterinarian have to go in there? And I work just like everybody else under the rule of law. Well, not everybody else anymore. Okay? I do work under the rule of law and due process. I have, as state veterinarian, some god-awful power in this state that scares the bejesus out of me because I can. Somebody had some conversation, I think, going on before I got here, at least I heard a little bit about it, about, well, the horses and come in and kill things and that sort of thing. Yeah, that power does exist. It really does. There are a couple of statutes on the books that says the state veterinarian can go in anywhere he suspects an animal of a contagious, infectious, or communicable disease and seize that animal. And if things need be, kill that animal. But we do have balances here. Even though the law's on the books, I don't know anybody that would be sitting in this position that would do that without an administrative order for a judge saying, yeah, this is what's got to happen. Unless we're dealing in a situation like African horse sickness where it's blowing through here so fast we don't have time to deal with paperwork. Y'all don't know what African horse sickness is, and that's a good thing. We don't want to ever do that. But that's the situation from a legal standpoint. So unless somebody's got a reason for us to go to that other facility next to yours that may not be quarantined, they may not get quarantined. That's kind of the long and the short of civilized law. Yes, ma'am.
Where do we, as horse owners, not trainers, not big stables, etc., where do we, as individual owners, go to find out, is it okay to go here? Is it not? You know, we're out in the Rio Verde, we're within that 10-mile radius of somebody who's been, quarantined.
Part of
So
that.
where do we go?
The question was, as regular horse owners, how do we know where we can go and where we can't? And especially if we're within the 10-mile radius.
Or what's
They just interrupt me and do that every time.
I'm gonna try.
I know I'm running. There's not a real good answer to that because, like the point was made a lot earlier, we don't know a lot about where the bad spots are, other than right now, obviously, bad spots around the Rio Verde area, but which one of those and why? Would I ride along the Verde River right now? Yeah, well,
It's not the river, it's
it's
one of the
around
streets
it.
off
It's around it.
Dynamite.
Would I take my horses and go 75 miles an hour going up to Jerome. You know that's probably a bad place to try that. But beyond that, if you're riding in a McLaren and it'll do 300 miles an hour, then you might want to try that. I mean, you know, I can't give you good answers. I just have to draw pictures.
Website that has updates of what the situation is.
Is there any website that you can go to for information?
How many of you want the public to know you have a problem? Okay, I've got 1 out of 75.
I think it's a responsible thing. I agree.
Ready for questions?
If, let's say, I wanted to haul a horse to Montana, and I know as of yesterday, they had a 14-day thing for your health certificate. So I get my health certificate, and it's for 14 days, and it's, I think, don't they have to register it with the place up in Montana, or whatever? Let's say tomorrow they change it to say, no, it's going to be 3 days. But I got my health certificate under the 14 days.
That's purely Marty Zalewski's call as the state veterinarian of Montana.
But we have to contact the vet in Montana before we can go there, is that true?
That's the smart thing to do.
Right.
I don't think that you are required to, but they may be issuing permits on that at this point.
Right. Montana always requires permits.
Even
Right.
for horses?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
You have to
But
have
if
a
you get your
permit.
permit,
Colorado does a lot too, so.
Colorado, the same deal.
A lot of, and that's why I tell people, you know, calling us is to find out what the requirements are out there.
Right.
Is going to frustrate you a little bit because I wouldn't really tell you as well this is what it used to be, but to know what it is today, call that office.
so if you get your health certificate though, and you're legal that day for 14 days, but like in 2 days or the next day they change it. That's my question are you still good because you got your health certificate, it was 14 days, and it was registered, or got
Well, it's not really registered.
No.
See, all you've got is a document that says that this date, this time, this animal appeared healthy.
Right.
Now,
Yeah, yeah.
most of us as rules give that certificate validity for the next 30 days. There's nothing magical about that. That's just what we've taken to be commonly accepted. Can somebody say like, no, right now, no, you got to have it within 14 days? Sure. Can they change it 10 days later and say, nope, you got to have it in 3 days? Absolutely. That's just one of the. That's like drawing cards to see which one you get, and that's just the way it is.
You get that.
I'm concerned about these quarantine counties. You said Yavapai is locked down. What if your trailer and your horse on I-17 between here and Flag on the way to New Mexico? You got a problem with that?
Can't think of any reason to.
Yeah. So just because you go through a quarantine county, it doesn't mean you're locked down?
Well, that's going to depend on the quarantine. How many of you have heard this thing about avian influenza lately? You know, if you're riding a bird through a county in Iowa that's quarantined for AI right now, you're probably not going to get through that county. So it depends on the disease we're talking about. With a VSV situation going through the state or county, it would surprise me to no end to find that somebody had stopped you somewhere. Not going to be the case. Yes, ma'am.
So how do we know when we're in the clear?
I think the question may be like the CDC, how the CDC has their website, is there CDC? Like the website, that's what you were asking, right?
Yeah.
And we can go to the information, knowing what the status of
USDA has an update almost all the time.
USDA?
USDA. And they have one almost daily a lot of times. And then they are coming up, they are in the near future, but it's going to be a little while out there. ACBIM, the college that I belong to, is coming up with a system to try to get information out to everybody all at the same time, but we have stopped it.
it's a matter of resources. Anybody, let me throw a couple of numbers at you just because I want you to understand the difference. Anybody know what the annual budget for the Department of Health Services in Arizona is?
How much did you make?
Your salary.
The Department of Health Services receives $540+ million a year from the legislature. 540. Does anybody know what the Department of Agriculture receives?
18,000.
Just under 14 million. It's a factor of about 45 difference. We simply don't have the people to do that sort of job. USDA is in something of the same situation.
We have a boarding stable, and today alone, I got probably 5 calls from people wanting to bring horses out of Rio Verde to our boarding station, which mine's full, so I couldn't take it. But is Rio Verde at this point under quarantine?
No, only the specific premises, and that's what I was trying to draw here. Maricopa County, Yavapai, Verde River, Salt. Right here is really the first case. All the rest of it pretty much was right here. Now I've got one right here. Only those premises where we've gone out to, based on what a veterinarian has seen, are under quarantine.
And can we find a place that tells us what premises those are?
Okay, that gets back to that question I brought up about privacy. The answer is actually yes. What you do is you submit a public records request asking for that information. We'll redact the people's names and telephone numbers, but we will send out the actual addresses for those. Because that's the only way folks like Dr. Cravo can really sit there and write that certificate and say, yes, I know they're with outside that 10-mile radius.
Can you give us some websites that we can,
Those pages that I mentioned earlier have several links to them. I've got a blog that I tried to keep updated with things on kind of a daily basis.
You guys in that PowerPoint that I made with a bunch of
Oh,
that'll be up.
yep.
The Arizona Horse Council also.
Yeah, very good point. Arizona Horse Council usually does a pretty good job of posting this on their place as well as their Facebook page. So look in those links, take a look there. Odds are if there's something happening and I'm breathing, I'll be able to get it out there.
excuse me,
Yes.
can we, just in response to what she asked, when do we know we're sort of out of trouble with it? Is it so many weeks after the last diagnosis?
Okay, that gets back to this. Your quarantines are 14 days. Once that 14 days up, either one of my staff or me or the veterinarian that's out to start with will swing back by there to make sure that there's nothing new. If there's nothing new, away you go. Now, whether another state though will allow you to come in, it's outside of my
But I
jurisdiction.
mean in the Rio Verde area. When do we all know when?
I wish I could tell you. The situation in Texas and Colorado started late spring, early summer last year and didn't quit till January this year. In 2005, when we had a pretty nasty spell of it, it started about June, July, and it ran all the way into October, I believe.
Need hard freeze, babe.
It's snowing in Flagstaff.
I know.
Which is really good for my plague problem up there.
Yes, exactly.
So really it's just staying close to these websites and they just keep us up to date.
That's, if you want to know, is it dying out? Yeah, that's really the only way to find out. Now, Hopeful Perry, the last 2 days we've only had one case come in. So I'm thinking maybe this is just really a weird situation. We go boom, boom, and we're done. I sure wouldn't bet my money on that though.
How many official cases should we actually have for you?
I have roughly 25 investigations going on. 25.
That doesn't mean that you
Roughly.
guys, 20 investigations are different than positive cases. Okay, so.
However, having said that,
Yeah.
there's really only 2 or 3 that are atypical, and one of the points I wanted to make is, y'all don't hear about this, but every year we investigate about 20 of these. But it always turns out to be something else. And we found a few other viruses that cause this, that like New York Apple Valley virus and weird things like that. So other viruses do cause this. We don't care from a regulatory standpoint. That's what it boils down to. Do you need to care about the care of your horse? Absolutely. But the state doesn't need to be in your business on that. So. Yes, ma'am.
So my horse could actually be infected, but he's not contagious unless he has a lesion that is bruising?
That's a really, 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 really good way of thinking about it.
Repeat it.
It's like, do you kiss somebody with an open sore? You know, I'm not going to go any further down that road. What I will say, to reiterate the point I kind of hollered in about the flu-like symptoms, this is zoonotic. I got an acquaintance, colleague, who was examining one of these things a couple of 3 years ago. What do? You look in there, what does a horse do from time to time? Right in her face. And she's about this high too, so it's, I mean, just a perfect dose. Now, because who she is and where she is and what she does, we actually tracked her titers and responses in some virus work in Plum Island. Her responses to VSV went like this. She suffered VSV for 3 weeks. Nasty, nasty flu. And I was told, I don't know this for certain, but I was told that a guy in Colorado last year actually broke the sores. So, face shields, folks. I'm seriously recommending that. Yeah, at least, you know, wear gloves when you're doing that, because you don't want to drag it. It's like, you know, where you throw the manure in the wagon, you take it off and you dump it somewhere. Well, it's the same way. You're taking it somewhere. Don't. Just don't. Sure, we're exposed to everything all the time. Think about that. Most of us are fine. Good point. Because there's a horse in Colorado right now, 10 years since she was infected, is ELISA positive. She's got great antibodies. Great antibodies. Which is insane because that's protective, but it's also what some countries use to prohibit the animal from coming in. You gotta love it. If they were coming in from another? Okay. Like Dr. Gold pointed out, the USDA does post these data. Typically it's on a weekly basis, but the person who's in charge of that has actually been out of country for a while. I think she's...
Yeah, Anna's coming back. She's coming back tonight.
Yeah, she and I have been trading notes at like
She's coming
3
back
in the
tonight.
morning.
She's from Israel.
Yeah.
She's coming back tonight.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm talking to her on Monday.
Oh, cool. Just say you heard something about changing that baby.
Oh, God. Okay.
Yeah, the company you keep, dear.
I have a friend that does the organization events, etc., and she's wanted me to come here and find out. Should she continue it over the summer? And you were kind of going into that.
Yeah, I kind of got sideways. Sorry about that. Couple of things. One, California, after the Ogden, everybody remembers Ogden EHV outbreak in 2011, I think it was. Something like that, with the herpes deal. California invested a lot of time and effort to develop what they call a biosecurity toolkit for equine events. That's available on the website. One of the links on one of those pages directs you there. They've got a ton of information on what you should do. They got kind of a light version, but even the light version is pretty heavy duty. Colorado, and there's supposed to be a link on there to it, last year said we can't read that much because it's in Colorado. So they came up with
Colorado
like,
made a shorter version.
well, you notice the North Carolina version.
Yeah, I know. That ain't even there.
We can't write it.
Yeah.
So anyway, there are some links to some things like that, but it really comes down to, my suggestion is have somebody there looking at those horses when they come in. Maybe hold temps on them, particularly during which time of year is, because when it gets hot, temps, it's hard to say whether this is real or not. But if it's like this and they're running a fever, you don't want them coming in. So the other thing is no sharing of anything.
Oh, yeah.
Pardon?
I just said thank you so much for putting this on.
Oh, yeah. Anybody else? Because I think I covered pretty much everything else. Yes.
Well, no, I just want to make sure I got this right. So,
Well, I know better than that.
well, I know. You spell it backwards, it's still PSV, right?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
It's always good to have help. And that we didn't grow much. Okay.
So you're originally from North Carolina?
Yes, ma'am, I am from the hills. Hills of North Carolina. Up the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Lovely area. Yeah. So what are you doing here then?
I've wandered around for the last 40-some years.
So you're lost. You don't say much for your intelligence if you can't find your way back there.
Well, it's not that I haven't, it's just that maybe they won't let me stay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was a guy by the name of Thomas Wolfe who wrote Can't Go Home Again.
Yeah.
He's from North Carolina too.